Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first live streamed cryptocurrency interview. Most of these I've been doing, I have only just recorded them. But my guest today is Jorge Stolfi, a professor actually, who has been talking about cryptocurrency a lot. And I was really excited that he agreed to do an interview with us because I've really been enjoying the stuff he has to say, and I would love to be able to ask some questions and hear his thoughts. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I was wondering if you might be able to give the viewers some idea of why you're interested in this topic and sort of how you got into it. Because from your past work, you did a lot of work on stuff like computational geometry and stuff. In fact, the sorts of things that we love on this stream normally. Actually, cryptocurrency wasn't your thing, but you got interested in it. Can you give a little bit of a background on how that started and what you've been doing?
Yeah, well, my cryptocurrency for me is a hobby more than, I mean, my real work is still in computer graphics, image processing, numerical methods for those things, some graph theory, and things like that. So I'm not an expert really on cryptography or networking, but I think I know enough to to not believe, to be very skeptical about cryptocurrencies in general, right? And blockchain technology and everything like that, touches to them. So
And so
I
you,
started I started following the cryptocurrency scene in 2013, very in December 2015, when the price crashed after Mount China blocked things and Mount Gox collapsed and things like that. I mean, people asked me, I mean, whether Bitcoin was something like Telex Free, which was a big MLM scheme
uh,
that was running here in Brazil. And I said, well, what is this thing? Let me see what it is. Okay, and I mean, so I follow it mostly for the comedy, right? But
oh, okay.
I mean, it is unbelievable. This before that, I had other. I mean, I followed the Voynich manuscript for several years. I mean, that was my hobby, and then
Okay.
before that, I followed Cold Fusion. I don't know if you have ever heard of it.
I have not.
It was no, it was two chemists thought that they had discovered a way to get nuclear fusion in a jar
Oh,
with
the heavy
electrochemistry.
water, the tritium one that was.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
yes,
heavy
I do
water
remember that.
electrolysis. Yeah, so I
Yes, yes.
followed that for several years too. I mean, but so it is. This is the cold fusion of now. Okay, um, and I don't know. I've been following ever since then and reading lots of posts by everybody, papers and white papers and things like that.
So, if I have your sort of take on cryptocurrency correct, because this is the first time we've ever spoken, so I only know sort of what I've read. You're very skeptical of it in general. It sounds like you're not particularly convinced of most of the claims that people are making. Is that a fair just to sort of set the table for where you're coming from, what your perspective was on it?
Well, I mean, you can look at it at if you look at it from the point of view of investment, I mean, I think it's just a big Ponzi scheme,
Okay.
and yeah, because there is no money that comes in and goes to the investors. The only way that people can get money from investing in Bitcoin is by taking money from other investors. So that's the definition of Ponzi scheme, basically, that your profit only comes from money that other investors put in. There is no revenue stream. Like a company normally has client products and clients, and the money that the clients give to the company, that's the revenue of the investors. But there are no such things in Bitcoin and will never be. There will never be. So yeah.
So from your
So
perspective, you're
that's how
kind of
much.
thinking of it as like a you're thinking of it just as a closed system, and you're saying, look, where does the money come from and where does the money go?
Yeah,
We can see
exactly.
that fairly clearly. Is that
Mhm. Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, maybe it is because I mean, people who go to college they learn about conservation theories in conservation of energy, conservation of mass, conservation. So, I mean, it's very instinctive, well, almost to when you see an investment scheme like that. I mean, well, where does the money come in and go out? I mean, there is no money going in. But anyway, but you are not interested in the investment part. There is another aspect that is the legality of it, and it is the perfect tool for money laundering and I mean, ransomware. That's something that actually I mean concerns us. Is was unknown before. I never heard of ransomware before I started following Bitcoin. And,
Me neither. Yeah.
maybe you heard it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now it seems to be the apparently it has already caused $5 billion of damage, and it is the major form of computer crime. I just read that the Sinclair TV network, 200 and some stations,
Oh.
went off the air because of a ransomware attack.
Okay.
Yeah, just now. Right? I
Wow.
mean,
Okay.
so I mean, there is so that other angle too. It's very bad, but I think that it doesn't concern us again, right? So we are talking about only the technology,
Well,
and
actually, if I could, I actually already had a question about what you said on the investment side because I am kind of interested in what you said there. Uh, so when you talked about the fact that it was a kind of a system where the money that comes in and the money that goes out, it just that's all there is. So people have to put money in for anyone to have gotten money out.
Mhm.
I guess I'm interested. What's the difference though? If we think about this as a currency, what would be the difference between this and say something like just US dollars or Chinese yuan or something like that, because currency in general is just a medium of exchange. So wouldn't that be basically the same thing for something like Bitcoin? The idea is to try and get it to a point where people are just using it as a means of circulation, right? Because in a normal currency, there's no payouts to investors, right?
Yeah, and well, that's one problem, right? If it were really a currency, there would be no point in investing in it because I mean a good currency has to be stable. In fact, a good currency has to be slightly inflationary because
Right.
if the value of the currency increases with time, people will start hoarding it, and then it will increase even more, and then it will be unstable. Then people will suddenly dump it, and then it will drop. I mean, economists agree with that currencies must have a few percent of inflation per year in order to be stable. And the national currencies, they are stable because the central banks monitor inflation I mean, by looking at tens of thousands of products all across the country and taking averages and so forth, and then correcting by increasing or taking or reducing the supply in circulation in order to keep the value stable. So Bitcoin doesn't have any of that, so that's why well its price goes up and down
So you might say
all the
that
time.
the two things are sort of counterposed. Like either Bitcoin is a good currency and therefore you wouldn't want to invest in it, you just use it when you needed
Mm-hmm.
it, or Bitcoin isn't a good currency, in which case it's a Ponzi scheme investment, but it can only be one or the other. Would that be a fair sort of
Yeah,
summary?
yeah. People invest in it because they expect the value to go up and go up. I mean, absurdly, right? I mean, and if its value goes up absurdly, it is not going to be a currency. Just from that point. But apart from that, I mean, even from the technical point of view, I mean, uh, the in my view, I mean, my view of what Satoshi was doing. I mean, I think that he was a computer professional. That probably, I mean, I imagine him as being a software developer at a big bank with a boring job, 9 to 5.
Yes.
But then, in the spare time, I had this idea that he heard about the problem of building a decentralized payment system, a payment system without a central authority somewhere. And he knew that, obviously knew that computer scientists had given up on that problem in the early 90s, when they, realized that basically the Byzantine generals problems is unsolvable unless you have, at least half of the nodes are honest, or sometimes even 2/3 have to be honest in order for the thing to happen. And if you have a decentralized payment system without a central authority, there is no way you can guarantee 50% honest people, right? At least not if they are volunteer. Anyone can come in, because the attacker can generate tens of thousands of fake nodes and overwhelm the honest ones anytime. And if it is a payment system, there is enough motivation for people to do that, right? Networks like BitTorrent or email or the old Usenet News, they were decentralized, but there was no incentive to attack them, because the worst thing that could happen is that you cannot download your pirate movie from some certain node. Well, okay. But a money system, of course, is very different. It has to be secure, and people could not make it secure, so they gave up in the 1993, I think, or something like that. Was the last time they talked about the problem.
So this might be actually a perfect place for me to just ask, since you are a professor, could you perhaps give the folks listening to these interviews just a quick pointer about where they would read more about something like the Byzantine generals problem? Because a lot of people actually don't know about the two generals problem or the Byzantine generals problem, and these are kind of fundamental theories you would want to know about if you're trying to understand cryptocurrency.
Yeah, well, I am not an expert in that area, so I don't have any good paper that would be readable for lots of programmers and software developers or whatever. There is one reference that I know that is called, it is by Cynthia Dwork.
I can put the link in the description when I post this video. In fact,
okay.
if you just name the paper or send me the link afterwards, you can just describe it now.
Yeah, I think it is this. Let me see. I will post it later.
Yeah.
Okay, but it is a longish paper that analyzes the problem of getting consensus among several nodes, where some nodes may be faulty or malicious. And so the malicious nodes may lie to their neighbors, trying to prevent them from getting a consensus on some, say, whether a bit should be 0 or 1, something like that. Okay, and so they concluded there that you need at least 2/3 of the nodes to be honest in order for the honest nodes to get to an agreement. Otherwise, the malicious nodes can always disrupt the thing, either by preventing them from reaching an agreement, or by having half of the honest nodes think that the bit is 0, and the other half think that the bit that they agreed upon is 1. Distributed payment system needs something of that sort, because if you pay, well, basically it has to do at least 3 things. You must make sure that when someone pays another person, the person who is sending the payment is the owner of the account from which the payment is being taken out. And that's solved by cryptographic signatures, right? Yes. That's why the computer scientists were all excited about this problem. because they had invented those public key systems that let them do lots of things that they couldn't do before, and they thought, well, maybe it will let us do this thing too. Okay, so you can verify that the person sending the check is actually the owner of the account. You can verify that you have to verify that the account has funds, and that you can do by having the ledger of all transactions be public, so that anyone can go there and check all the chain of payments and trace the funds back to the mint when the money was created, and see that the money is in the account. And the third thing is that you must make sure that when the person pays a check out of that account, is not paying to several people from the same amount of money. That's the double spending problem, right? And well, no one could figure out a way of solving that, because for that you needed everybody to agree on one copy of this distributed ledger. And that was the problem. I mean, there was no way of ensuring that there was agreement. A malicious attacker could get half of the network to think that the ledger was A, half to think that the ledger was B, and in A, you paid one guy, and B, you paid another guy from the same account. So that's why the computer science gave up on the idea around 1993. But I mean, the cypherpunks still kept churning the same problem, because their dream is to make a society of of cybernauts on the internet that can function out of the reach of governments, and without any sort of authority or something that controls the society. So for that, they needed a payment system in order to have a society that can be called that thing. And that payment system had to be distributed. So they kept working on that for something like 15 years or so. So there were several proposals that, well, the people described the system, but then they got to that point, how do you prevent double spending? And they said, well, we are still work to do here, right? We have to, so maybe we need to find a way. And so Satoshi apparently thought that he had an idea to solve that, but he was not aware, apparently, of many of those, most of those attempts by cypherpunks. He wasn't even aware of the work of Cynthia Work and others on that problem.
Can you mention those specifically? Just I can also put them in the link below. But sorry, I didn't catch that. Which work?
There is Wei Dai.
Okay.
Is one of them, and Nick Szabo is another one. You know the name? You know the names? No, you can. You need me to spell them?
No, that's okay. I'll write them down and I'll get them from you after. I just want to make sure I have my notes here.
I can type them in chat.
No, it's fine. I've got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt there, but continuing. So they didn't know necessarily about or Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that actually is, didn't perhaps know about this work.
Yeah, from the people that he quoted in his they cited in the white paper, and the correspondence that he had with Adam Back before he released the thing. I mean, it's clear that he wasn't very much into either the cypherpunk culture or the distributed payment system work that came before by the academics. But apparently he thought that he had found a solution to the problem and wanted the academics to recognize it, because he wrote a paper that is a very good paper from academic standards, right? Not stellar, but I wish my master students and PhD students could write that well, right?
Yes.
So that's a skill that people don't get normally, because I mean, it's not a net. You needed to write papers and have them rejected by your advisor and referees and so forth
Yep.
to learn to write a decent paper.
Yep.
So yeah, so I think that he had a master's degree, by my guess.
Okay.
Not a PhD, because I think this paper is not quite the level of
Okay.
PhD. It has something.
Okay. Okay.
It
Okay.
has for instance, it has a piece of C code in the paper.
Yeah.
That's something that
Yeah.
not good form. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so that's my idea of who Satoshi was, right?
Yes.
I mean, so a guy with a master's degree, a competent software developer, but not very much into the thing. That he had this bright idea. He thought, well, maybe with proof of work, we can get around that problem of malicious agents trying to overwhelm the network with fake nodes. Because if I require the nodes to do a work, then there is no way that a single attacker can overwhelm 10,000 other nodes that are working on the same thing. So, and so he was very excited. Apparently, he was convinced that he had solved the problem, and he posted the paper on a cryptography mailing list, which is read by academics as well as professionals and cypherpunk. I imagine that he was very disappointed when computer scientists didn't pay any attention to the paper.
Okay. Okay.
Because, well, I mean, it still didn't quite solve the problem, because, of course, it is, as Satoshi himself was aware, I mean, it's still vulnerable to 50%. If you have a majority of nodes that are dishonest, they can wreck his system too. His only argument was that if the miners, the nodes that are calling them, if the nodes are anonymous and the hashing power is well distributed, I mean, say, so no one single node has more than, say, 1% or 0.1% of the hashing power, then it makes no sense for one node to try to attack the network, because it will just waste. It will cost him a lot of money, and will be wasted work, because the others, even if you collude with, say, I mean, a few hundred miners were to collude, they could not do anything. But the problem is that, well, it was not. He did not see the possibility of mining pools. And in fact, the fact that it was inevitable that hashing power would become centralized. And so now you have about, I think, the six largest mining pools. They control something like 70% of the total hashing power. So, well, if even 4 or 5 of them were to agree, they could rewind the blockchain and write again. And that happened, in fact, twice. I mean, in 2010, there was an overflow bug in the code that someone discovered and exploited to create, I think, 4 billion bitcoins in one transaction.
A very suspicious number.
Yeah, by sending, well, it was, yeah, it is
2 to the 32, right? It's like, well, that sounds like something that an overflow
sometimes,
might
yeah,
create.
it was,
Yeah.
well, it usually uses 64-bit
Oh,
unsigned
okay, okay,
arithmetic,
okay,
but
okay. Yeah,
there are fractions.
okay.
The fractions, the unit is actually 100 millionth of a
I see.
Bitcoin.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it is 2 to the 64 of those units. And that's about 2 to the 32 or so on that order, man. But then the guy, the Bitcoin had the facility to compute the amount of the check by a little formula that you could put into the check. I mean, but it is useless. It was useless because, I mean, well, you could do the math before writing the check. But so the guy wrote formula that subtracted a bigger number from a smaller number. Then you got a negative overflow. And since it was unsigned digits, then the output was,
Yep.
and it was everybody
Yeah.
accepted that, right? Because everybody was using the
Same
same
code.
math to validate the code. And so, well, so they discovered it in, I mean, in about, I think it was probably half a day after that, the the CEO of Bitcoin, right? The guy who was in charge of the maintaining the software. He contacted some of the largest miners that were and convinced them to abandon that blockchain, go back and rebuild one starting 50 blocks earlier and build a new one, excluding that transaction, and also changing the software so that arithmetic operations were no longer allowed. So okay, so that's one case in which the blockchain was actually rewound. So there were two versions of the blockchain, and
Can I ask a clarifying question there too? So sort of like one of the things that I've noticed people are often say in this circumstance is they'll say something like, "Well, the design of Bitcoin is game theory balanced so that people won't want to do that because if they're miners, they want the currency to be stable or they want the currency to be trusted. So they're not going to do things like try to do fraudulent activities because if fraudulent activities occurred a lot, then the currency people would abandon it. So do you know what I'm saying? Like they're sort of suggesting there's a
yeah,
social
no,
incentive there. Do you have any thoughts on that? I realize it's not necessarily a technological question, but I'm just curious since obviously you've thought about this a lot. If you have any opinions about that.
well, I mean it works. It has worked so far in the sense that well, the miners never had a strong enough incentive to do that. I mean, because well, is um, the way the miner, I mean, if you imagine, say, 51% of the miners wanted to get money by doing dirty tricks. I mean, so what would they need? Well, they need something like make a big payment to someone, collect whatever gold or whatever it is that they made with that payment, and then rewind the blockchain so that they are no longer
Yeah.
paying that guy. They are paying, so they get back the bitcoins. Um, it is not easy to find a situation where that happens, right? So, and it is risky because, well, there may be legal consequences or the guy may. So, um, but there might be. I mean, there have been two cases where the blockchain was rewound by, I mean, good reasons
Right. Yes.
at that time. And the second time was another bug that forced them to go back and abandon the majority branch and go to the minority one.
Yeah.
And in that case, one of someone um, uh, I mean, took advantage of that rewind to do a double spending. I mean, right?
Ah. Yeah.
He had deposited $10,000 to a private processor in Bitcoin, and then he replaced the transactions by another one. So the payment processor suddenly saw his bitcoins evaporate, right? But in that case, I mean, the guy was eventually identified, or he identified himself, and he paid the money to the payment processor. But the transaction was never fixed, right? I mean, so that's double spend. And of course, there is no trace of that. It is not really a double spend in the sense that in
Yeah.
the blockchain there are two transactions
Right.
pointing the way. It is a fraudulent reversal, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So there is no trace of that in the blockchain now because the blockchain now is just a new branch. The old branch has been abandoned.
So if you
Uh,
think about this too, like one of my major concerns about this sort of thing has been that you already mentioned that we, in Bitcoin, for example, we're already in a position that seems very similar to the existing banking system, namely that 5, 6, 7 large actors pretty much control what happens in the Bitcoin blockchain, as far as I can tell, anyway. What would you say? I mean, would it be a fair statement to say that the goal of this decentralized payment system, namely that large actors can't disenfranchise people from the payment system, can't remove them from it, seems like that would not really be true anymore in a sense, because since they control the entire blockchain, these actors would have the ability to essentially blacklist people, to keep them off of the blockchain? Or is it that because when you create Bitcoin transactions, you're typically using anonymized wallets, it's actually not really a risk because those actors won't know who you are?
Well, I mean, I think that that's ideal. That maybe I don't even know whether Satoshi was really keen on that idea. I think that he was excited about solving the problem that the
Okay.
computer science didn't
Okay.
solve.
Please
But
elaborate. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but the cypherpunks that took over the project afterwards, they certainly wanted that, right? That was what they saw in Bitcoin.
Yes.
Um, and I think that that idea is I mean, as broke as collapsed for many ways. I mean, like
Please. Yeah.
first, most of people keep their bitcoins in exchanges,
Right.
which are totally like banks, except that there is no insurance, there is no regulation, no
Yeah.
accounting, and
Yeah.
the guy can just close the exchange, take away all the coins, and say
Yeah.
goodbye.
Which has happened.
Or yeah, there is one case where the guy left a nice word on the website, right? You
Yes.
may have heard of that case,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's one way that the thing broke down. I mean, that most Bitcoin transactions are done in centralized exchanges or in centralized custodial wallets, right? Like El Salvador is. For
Yes.
the Chivo, as far as I know, is a centralized custodial wallet.
Yes.
So what people have there is not Bitcoins, it is IOUs of Bitcoins. Uh, but that's one way. The second way is that the miners are centralized, actually mining pools, right? I mean, the miners themselves may be more distributed, but um, the way the things work is that it is the mining pool that builds the blocks and validates things and decides which currency, whether it should mine BTC or BCH or some other currency with the same hashtag. And then it farms out the jobs, the actual hashing jobs to the miners. But the miners don't even know what is in the block. May not even know which currency they are mining.
I see. I see. I see. Yeah.
So it is the pools that if they wanted to go back and rebuild the blockchain, the miners would not even notice that probably, right?
Wow.
The
Okay.
actual man.
All right.
Okay, they should just get blocks to mine, and they will mine them, get paid by the work they do by the pool. As long as the pool pays them, they will be satisfied. So, and the third is that the government has tools. It has private companies that do service that serve the government, like Chainalysis, I think, is the most famous of them.
Okay.
That actually scan the blockchain and do all sorts of analysis of transactions to try to detect, I mean, who paid who. I mean, to identify the users, because I mean, some addresses are known, like exchanges. When you post something to the exchange, then the exchange is formally, generally required to keep your identity, right?
Right.
And then they know the dark markets. They have addresses that where you have to send your payment, and the cops know that those addresses, so forth. So they can trace lots of things about that, and most of the traffic in the blockchain, by the way, I think it is probably 90%, I would guess, is mixing, which is
Ah,
people moving coins from one address to another thousands of times in the hope of confusing that software, that tracing software. But the government has been doing that job. I mean, they have been able to bring criminal charges against the drug traffickers based on blockchain traffic, whatever. Um, there is a case, for instance, the Continental Pipeline ransomware attack that
right.
okay. When the government, I mean, the hackers apparently were not very smart and they deposited the ransomware in some exchange. That's what I deduced. It's not, I don't think they ever, the FBI never explained exactly how they did it,
I
but
see.
they recovered a good part of that money, apparently because um, the ransomware hackers were not very smart about their security, whatever.
So would the
So, I
pattern
mean,
kind of look something like if in the future somehow we got to the point where everyone was running their own like Bitcoin wallet? So they had it, so they were off, of any kind of aggregation and they had their own Bitcoin wallet. They were always using newly generated addresses for payments, so they're somewhat anonymized there. And
mhm.
we then go, does this actually give us sort of any kind of decentralization or anonymous payment system? And it sounds like the answer from your perspective would be no, because A, the government is already well versed in analyzing metadata and finding out who you are from patterns. And of course, the blockchain makes it impossible to hide that because the entire
Mhm.
blockchain is always kept as a ledger that people can see because it's its only real safety mechanism. And two, that wherever you are actually going to go to do something with the money, meaning however you were planning to get it out into actual usable currency or however you were going to actually go spend it in practice, the government must have control over that entity anyway because they are a grocery store or a actual bank or something that the government can directly touch. So in effect, you're just back to the exact same system we have now.
Yes, well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, is halfway through. I mean, in a halfway point when it has both the bad thing, the bad consequences of one extreme and the bad consequences of others.
Okay, okay.
So the government tracing is not perfect, right?
Yes.
It can catch only a fraction of
Mm-hmm.
all the bad things that people do on the blockchain.
Okay.
But it has enough. It can catch enough of them that you cannot trust that the blockchain is safe,
Right.
right? So
Yes. Yes, yes.
on the other hand, it doesn't since it doesn't catch everybody. Then there is lots of bad things that's being
Okay.
done with blockchain, like ransomware or whatever, right?
Yes.
So we have the worst of both worlds. I mean, the worst of a fully controlled payment system and the worst of a totally anonymous payment
That's
system.
not going to be a very good selling point. Bitcoin, the worst of both worlds. So invest
Yeah,
today.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
governments, I think, well, now goes into the politics, and the policies of the government with regard to cryptocurrencies, right? And they should ban cryptocurrencies just because of that problem. Like, I mean, ransomware, there is no excuse, I mean, for them to tolerating something that
I
whose
see.
main use is
Yeah.
ransomware and other illegal payments, whatever. So, but I mean, the government has already banned other things like that in the past. There used to be the Swiss numbered bank accounts. I don't know if you've
Right.
heard of them.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're kind of anonymous and
yeah,
yeah,
anonymous.
yeah,
You just add a password or something,
yeah.
and uh, so those were banned. I mean, right? The Switzerland, as far as I know, doesn't allow them anymore. There were bearer bonds pieces of paper that tell you that well, this thing is worth $10,000, by the Treasury, or it is 10,000 shares of General Motors or whatever. And those were used as very large denomination banknotes. So
Yes.
you could transfer $1 million in an envelope instead of a big valise. So those were banned too. Okay. So I think that, and there was Liberty Reserve that was also providing a banking service, anonymous banking service. All that you needed in order to open an account was an email address. And the US government closed it down after a long battle. And the creator of Liberty Reserve is now serving, I don't know, 30 years in the US prison
Yes,
or something
yes,
like that.
I do believe so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Artur Bodovsky Budovsky is his name. And like the stable currencies, like Tether, that are the currencies that claim to be pegged one-to-one to the dollar. So they are not useful as investment, but they are useful as currencies between. Uh, so people, most of the volume of transactions in cryptocurrencies in the cryptocurrency exchanges is done with using those stable coins rather than actual money, because um, all over the world, the banks are closing the accounts of cryptocurrency exchanges. So, but those stable coins, they work exactly like Liberty Reserve. I mean,
Yes.
you can send money with anonymous account. They are denominated in dollars, so it's stable and everything. It's a perfect thing, and it is centralized because, well, uh, if they wanted, the Tether and other companies that run those things, they could control which addresses are active or not. So they could require identification for everyone who opens an account there. But of
Yeah.
course they don't. They won't never do that.
And of course, the government would have the ability at any time to force a exchange like Tether, because they're working directly with U.S. dollars. The government could come in at any time and require them to do anything they wanted. They could require them to know exactly who all the people are. They could require them to be capitalized a certain way, et cetera. Right? Because that's an even more obvious place the government can apply
Mhm.
immediate pressure, I would assume.
Well, I don't know if you have been following the Tether
Only a
saga.
little bit. Only a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they
New
are
York
already in
City, I
trouble.
think the Attorney General
Yeah.
has already filed an action with them against them.
Twice, yeah, twice
Yeah.
already they
Okay.
went against them for things. But and they are banned in New York City or something like that. And since they are based, I think the company is formally based now in the Virgin Islands or the
They
Caymans or
move
some
around. Yeah.
place.
They have lots
Yeah,
of different.
they
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
they were in
Yeah.
Hong Kong. They were
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Taiwan.
Yeah.
Okay, but they the Uh, so they are more or less outside the reach of the U.S. government, as long as they don't serve U.S. Residents or U.S. Citizens. The U.S. government cannot do anything about that. It's up to the governments of Hong Kong or
Yes.
Cayman
Yes.
Islands or
Yes.
whatever
Yes.
they are. And but they might be used. But if the government cannot stop U.S. criminals from using the system
Yeah.
in practice, right? So it is likely that they will be banned too, but then not by the New York Attorney General,
Right.
not by the SEC or whatever. That will have to be by the FBI. And
Right. Right. Right.
okay, um, I mean, but the problem is that, well, they are very big. I mean, Liberty Reserve, I think, had $5 or $6 billion of maximum total accounts well, just before it was shut down. The Tether alone is already $65 billion
Yes.
of fake
Yeah.
dollars,
Yes.
play dollars, whatever. Right? No one knows exactly how much money they actually have. But even if they had, they are not. If you read their terms of service, they are not obliged to exchange back USDTs for real USDs. I mean,
Yes.
so only money that they have in the company, it's just good as if it was belonging to the owners because
Yeah.
they are not required to give it back. Yeah. So I don't know. I think that it's inevitable that they will be shut down, uh, the same way that Liberty Reserve was. I mean, and but that would have to go. For instance, Liberty Reserve. The one problem is that since it was based in, I think, Costa Rica, they had to get the government of Costa Rica to agree to extradite the guy,
Yes.
and then they had also to agree, collaborate with all other uh, police departments in other countries to bring build the case against them or whatever. So it takes years for that to happen, unfortunately. Right? But anyway, that's politics more than and
Yes.
policy more than technicals, right?
So let me just to turn to the technical side of things. Then I guess I have two sort of questions, and we can take them in either order. The first one is to get back to sort of the distributed consensus problem, which is, I guess, what we could call this in general, because there really isn't much, like you said, the Byzantine generals problem. There isn't really much that you need for a distributed banking system other than distributed consensus. So that's really the primary thing that we're talking about. The cryptographic signatures are
Mhm.
nice because they remove some things from that consensus problem that you don't have to worry about anymore. But in general, you still end up with a distributed consensus problem at the end of the day. So one question I have is this a good distributed consensus protocol if we were going to use one? And maybe we'll just start with that question, meaning, let's suppose for some reason we decided that we're going to give it a shot. We know that we have the 51% problem that we can never really solve because we've proved it's unsolvable, but we're going to do it anyway for some reason. Is Bitcoin's model a good model for distributed consensus given that, or is it just a waste of time?
Well, you have to distinguish distributed from decentralized, right? I mean,
Sorry, yes, I
distributed
meant
consensus.
decentralized. Yes, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry,
okay.
yes. Distributed is
That's a
much easier.
confusion.
Yes.
But that's a confusion that more people often make.
I
I mean,
apologize. Yes.
distribute. Yeah, no. But I mean, distribute. It's important to get that clear because many people talk about blockchain technology. They don't seem to be clear about the
Yes.
distinction either,
Yes.
right? So I mean, distributed is easy because you just have several nodes that work on the problem, but must be a central not. There must be a central authority that monitors those guys and takes down the guys who are bad. And when there is a dispute, I mean, when they disagree, the central authority decides who is right and who is wrong.
Yes.
So, okay. I mean, for instance, well, the blockchain technology, right? The blockchain is a terrible database for a ledger. I mean,
Please
it's
elaborate. Yeah, that's what people would love to hear
well, I
about
mean,
technique.
it is a sequential list of all transactions. So it is not, when people talk about database, of course, they start with a structure that is more than a linear list,
Yeah.
right? They have trees and B trees and sort of things. But Satoshi couldn't use any of those fancy structures for his ledger because uh, complicated structure, when you wanted to update them, you need usually to lock things because you needed to change things in various places. I mean, if you have a tree, you needed to go up the tree and change the pointers, whatever. And so, well, how do you do that in a distributed, decentralized uh, way? Well, when one guy may be trying to update pointers one A and B, the other guy might be able to trying to update them too. But one updates A, the other one updates B, and then they become inconsistent and so forth. Well, the way you solve that usually is you have a locking system where the guy says, "Well, I'm going to change pointers A and B. Please lock them. I will change them, and then now you're ready. Everybody else can do. But lock to implement a locking, you need a central server because there must be a central place that decides, no, that guy now has the lock. No, now he releases the lock. Now that guy has the lock. And so, well, you cannot have locking, at least as far as I know, you cannot have decentralized locking. And so Satoshi couldn't use any of those fancy data structures, trees or B trees or whatever. And the only structure that he could use that could be updated in a decentralized way was a linear list, because then you don't need to change anything in the data structure. You just need to append another record with a pointer to the previous one, right? And then, well, you can, the inconsistency that you can have is that two people can append the two records, but then he has this majority of work principle that says that if you have two branches, the branch which has most work in it is the real one, and you should look at that and forget the other one. So that's why he invented blockchain. He used a blockchain rather than a block tree or something like that in his system, because he couldn't find a way to use any more sophisticated and more efficient data structure for the ledger. So
But in a sense, I mean,
uh,
you could just look at that distributed ledger as the update sequence. So, you could be building while this ledger is coming in, you could use the ledger as the
yeah,
sequence of operations necessary to keep each node keeping the tree. So it's not really that much of a practical limitation, is it?
no. In fact, his own software, the software that miners use,
Yeah.
they actually have two data databases
Yeah.
inside them, which are not blockchains, right?
Right.
It's just the,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
main pool where they store the transactions that have just arrived, and the UTXO set, which is all the accounts basically that have spent their funds,
Yes.
or that still have funds.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So internally, so what functionality could a blockchain provide to a distributed system, whatever? It's basically an append-only log.
Mm-hmm.
Well, banks and any large company that operates distributed, not decentralized
Okay.
service. I mean, must have those logs too. I mean, even a totally centralized one. I mean, must have a log that records all the operations that was made, because if there is a bug, they need to replay the log or analyze the log. There is auditing. There are lots
Yes.
of reasons why you may want an append-only log.
Yeah.
But those companies already have
Yeah.
ways of doing append-only logs that are reliable. Say you pay two companies to you pay monthly to two companies to keep a copy of your log, and whenever you append an entry there, you send a copy of what you appended to them, and they keep in sync or whatever. So I mean, mirror databases is not new.
No.
I mean, yeah, I mean, 500 meters from here, there is the data center of Santander in Brazil, and they have two buildings that are 500 meters apart that keep two copies of all the databases, which is synchronized, right? Whatever. So they know how to do that. So I mean, people who propose blockchain solutions to problems, they generally don't understand the problem. They don't understand. They don't know how the companies already solve that problem, and often they don't understand the blockchain either. So anyway.
So the other question that came to mind about the technology is some people say that this will be able to help people who don't have access to banking services to get access to banking services. And to give just a little context to this, because it's sort of a it's a little bit difficult to conceptualize for me because again, a lot of times when people talk about blockchain stuff, they're not always as specific as you might like because of course they're very hopeful about it. But the idea is if you were going to take someone in a country that doesn't have particularly good access to banking for some reason, uh, is there some benefits to this kind of technology, the decentralized blockchain kind of technology, for getting those people access to banking in some way, being able to accept and send payments for work they do over the internet or these sorts of things? I've just heard this talked about as a potential benefit. Some people throw in sort of the illicit transaction aspect of it, like funding. WikiLeaks is often mentioned, but we kind of already talked about that. So I'm now talking more about people who governments are not really trying to prevent access to the banks, they just don't have good access to the banking system. Does it help there at all?
Well, I mean, there are two answers for that. Well, first of all, I mean, Bitcoin is terrible. I mean, Bitcoin is not viable as a currency. Therefore, I mean, you cannot hope to to begin with. Actually, there are many reasons. So the first problem is that Bitcoin is not a currency. So how can you give access to the unbanked? Is the buzzword,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
With something that is not a useful currency, right? It will never be a currency of commerce. The second is that, well, the Bitcoin BTC in particular can handle only something like four transactions per second, which is about 1/10,000th of what Visa does. And most of those four transactions per second is probably mixing
Yeah,
by
right.
people. But that those four transactions per second, they account only something like that. If you have a million users, they can only, I mean, that's about 350,000 transactions per day. If you have a million users, that means that they can do only one payment every 3 days. If you have 10 million users, it is one payment per month. So it is totally, technically, it is not useful as a payment system. Um, and the third thing is that, well, there are centralized solutions that are much better for that. You know about M-Pesa?
No.
Have you heard it? No. Yeah, M-Pesa is a system that is used in Kenya. It's like the PayPal that is used there. And it works like this. The phone company lets people transfer credits from their prepaid phones to any other phone, right? So you just type in the phone number that the person you want to pay and the amount, and boop, that's transferred. So you don't even need a smartphone to use that system. Just a dumb phone is enough. And on every street corner, there are little bodegas, little places that let you pay in cash and recharge your account uh, in the M-Pesa system. So it is used everywhere. I once used Google Street View to go into Kenya, and
Ah,
there were M-Pesa signs everywhere.
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
In the very, I mean, this is really very, very poor parts of the city, right? I mean, the streets are paved and full of potholes and whatever, but there is M-Pesa everywhere. So
Okay.
Kenya, they are using, they are unbanked, they're totally banked
Yes, yes,
by that system. But it is centralized, right? It is run by the phone company.
yes.
Uh, and it is very cheap. I think well, the fees are, if you transfer less than $1, it is free, and things like that. So,
So right
uh,
now there are a lot of people obviously trying to solve, quote unquote, some of these problems that we've mentioned, like for example the transactions per second problem. Even Bitcoin itself has been trying to solve that with things like Lightning Network and so on. Have you looked much at new technologies, to the extent that they can be called technologies, that people are trying to develop for decentralized payment systems? And do any of them strike you as adding anything to the conversation, or do you think it's all just kind of pointless?
I mean, well, there are many, so many
Yeah.
proposals, and
Yeah.
all of them claim to be completely different from the
Yes.
other ones.
Yeah.
I can't say that I'm keeping track of all of
Okay.
those, but the ones that I've looked into, I mean, they don't solve the problem at all.
Okay.
Like repo, for instance, claims to be a much better, much faster, much everything, and doesn't use pure proof of work and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't use proof of stake.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, by the theorem of that 1993 theorem,
Mm-hmm.
then they should be either unsecure or centralized.
Right.
And they claim that they are not. They are totally secure and they are totally
Right.
decentralized because they have this man. I mean, lots of volunteer validators who are checking it. But if you read their white paper, I mean, down there is information that, well, it only works if every validator has 80% overlap in his contacts with any other validator. So, and the only way, practical way that you can achieve that is if all of the validators have 80% overlap with a small list that is published by Ripple of
Right.
people's
Yeah.
interest. Right. So,
Yeah.
but try to tell that to the guys who run Ripple. Right?
Mm.
They keep insisting, no, we are decentralized. It is impossible for the ledger to be for Ripple to rewind and
Mm-hmm.
replay the ledger because we are decentralized.
Mm.
Anyway, what else? Well, the Lightning Network, I mean, I've looked into it, and there are several flaws in it that prevent it from scaling. I mean, it works, but in the sense that you send the payments. But it was built, it was meant to be the way for Bitcoin to scale to hundreds of millions of users. And it cannot even scale to a million users that Bitcoin may have today. Or 2 million. I don't know what many people actually use Bitcoin.
Yes.
But because there are I mean many things that nodes need to do in order to send payments that there is no algorithm for doing that. And I mean you could prove that. I mean, of course, proofs are mathematical proofs are not guarantee that you're gonna do the thing in practice, right? But I think you can prove that the thing is impossible. The problems are impossible to solve because the data simply that they need is not there. They cannot get there. I mean, they're trying to guess a number without knowing anything about how it was generated or anything. So there are several problems like that in the Lightning Network concept, not the implementation. So I don't have any faith that it will ever work in the sense that of being able to scale Bitcoin.
Well,
Whatever.
I was gonna say I think what?
IOTA,
Sorry.
fortunately, IOTA
No.
it was another system that instead of using a blockchain, it uses a
Oh.
directed acyclic graph.
Okay.
Have you heard of it?
I
Right.
have not.
So yeah. So the idea is that instead each transaction was a little block by itself, and it pointed to two other transactions,
Mm-hmm.
and that created a big graph
Mm-hmm.
that thinks and wave ends, wave ends, wave ends, and
Okay.
that was secure, right?
Okay.
So, well, but they couldn't make that work. They had to put in a thing called a coordinator, centralized
Yeah.
to make sure that the ledger be remain consistent
Yeah.
and not double spend.
Yeah.
And they promise that they soon will remove that coordinator. That's just temporary, right? Okay. So whatever, whatever.
That's
I
pretty
don't know.
great.
There are a couple of things, a couple of systems that have been designed by real computer scientists. I think one of them is Algorand by Silvio Micali from MIT,
Okay.
and the other one is Avalanche or AVAX
Yes. Yes.
by Emin Sirer from Cornell. But I mean, as far as I know, they are still classical uh, distributed consensus algorithms that depend on having a certain percentage, minimum percentage of honest nodes. It's probably half or 2/3 or something like that. So I don't think that there is anything that deserves to be called a cryptocurrency in the sense of being solving the same problem that Satoshi thought they had solved. That works. That's 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 my knowledge so far.
Well, I think that's basically all my questions. Did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to share with people? That maybe stuff that I didn't ask, for example, that you just wanted to get out there.
Well, I mean, Bitcoin is a Ponzi that
Okay.
people bribe.
Okay.
That's okay. But apart from the technical perspective, I don't know. I think that maybe Satoshi himself realized that his invention was not working because he left. Um, I mean, in something in mid 2010, someone posted a version of his software that would let people mine using GPUs.
Mm.
And then the more GPUs you put in your computer, the more hashing power you would have. And Satoshi was very angry about that. And he asked the guy to please don't publish that software.
Oh,
Of
okay.
course,
Okay.
it was useless, right? But because he felt that well, that would I mean, go against his hypothesis that mining would be well distributed. And in fact, I mean, that was the beginning of the race that led us to those huge mines that spend 7 gigawatts of power or 8 gigawatts of power, which is more than Argentina or more than Austria,
Okay.
consume just to
Uh,
secure past transactions, right? I mean, you see that the people say, well, that makes the system secure, but it only secures past transaction.
yeah.
In order to secure, if you make another transaction, the miners have to spend a lot more money securing that one. In fact, I mean, well, yeah, there is one characteristic of well, first of all, if you're thinking of using uh, blockchain in some application, right, you have to choose whether you use a public blockchain from some cryptocurrency or a private one. If you use a private one, well, it's the same thing as, as using a, if you are centralized, it will be centralized, and then you might as well use whatever technology you're using already. Right? And if you're using a public one, well, the public one will only exist as long as there is people investing in the currency. So you are pegging your company services to basically a Ponzi scheme. But even if it is not a Ponzi scheme, it is for an investment scheme that depends completely on what the market will think. And that's all those blockchains. They have the characteristic that a transaction that's for a certain amount X is not secure until the miners have spent at least X, probably more than X, mining blocks on top of it. So they spent probably something like $50 million a day of electricity today. So if you're sending $500 million in one transaction or several transactions, I mean, if all the clients to store $500 million, they you should not trust that transaction until 10 days for 10 days because until then there is
Right.
incentive enough for the miners to rewind it,
I see.
right? So it is a system that is expensive, I mean, absurdly expensive by design. I mean,
Yes.
in order to transact a certain amount of money, the operators have to spend a similar amount of money. So I mean, anyway, so that's one of the reasons why it doesn't make, I think, any sense to use blockchains in public or private the thing. Anyway,
Well,
for whatever it's worth.
it's worth a lot. Thank you so much for your time today. Can you give the folks at home some idea of where is the best place to follow you online if they'd like to hear more of what you're saying in the future? Is it Twitter? Is it, where's the right place to follow you?
Well, currently I've been tweeting a lot about those things, but I was very active on Reddit, and there is a subreddit called r Butcoin, BUTT coin.
Everyone loves that. Everyone I've talked to talks about
Yeah,
Buttcoin.
it
Okay.
is the place where critics,
Okay.
the watering hole of critics, right? So I post there, and you can message me through there too. You can send me a mail. And my mail is Stolfi at sign. Well, I can put it uh, put it on the chat if you want. Let me.
I'll put it in when we post it for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and hopefully we could do it again sometime when maybe there's some more cryptocurrency developments. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure. Really a pleasure. I mean, one of the best interviews I had.
Well, you know
in
what?
this,
Like I said, I would
this
love to do it again. I'll probably contact you sometime at the end of all this for another one. So if you enjoyed it, that's great because I would love to do it again sometime. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.